19 detectives, helicopters over the Missouri River, $15,000 of American public money burned in 72 hours, all to find a woman who was never lost. She was a sitting city councilor, the wife of a deputy fire chief, a mother of 3 in Montana on official government business. And while search teams walked the riverbank looking for her body, she was standing on a casino floor in Las Vegas, 1,300 miles away. The missing woman and the suspect were the same person. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Lethbridge sits on the southern Alberta prairie, about 65 miles north of the Montana line. 70,000 people. Wind that comes off the Rockies and does not stop. It is the kind of city where the local paper prints the full council agenda, where the mayor's home number is not exactly a secret, and where an elected official cannot buy groceries without 3 separate conversations about drainage bylaws. Darlene Heatherington, everyone used Dar, was born in 1963. By the fall of 2002, she was 39, in her first term as alderwoman, and she was good at the job in the way that matters in a small city. She remembered names, she returned calls, she showed up. She was visible. She wanted to be visible. Politics in a place that size runs on being liked, and she was. Her husband David was the city's deputy fire chief. That detail is worth holding on to. Between the two of them, they occupied a large share of Lethbridge's public trust, council chambers, and the fire hall. They had been married since the late 80s, 3 children, the youngest 4 years old, the oldest 10. From the outside, it read as a complete life, a career on an upward line, a husband with a uniform and a pension, a house full of kids' shoes by the door. What almost nobody in Lethbridge could see was what that life cost to maintain. Every part of it was performed in public. Her reputation was not a private asset. It was the currency the whole household ran on. A rumor in a city of 70,000 does not stay a rumor. It becomes an atmosphere. And in October of 2002, Dar Heatherington walked into the Lethbridge police station and told officers that someone had started calling her. The date was October 28th, 2002. She told police that over the previous months, she had taken 7 calls from a man she did not know. The first ones were almost flattering. He had been following her work at City Hall. He admired what she was doing for the city. Then the tone shifted. He began describing her body. She had not recorded any of them, not one. There was nothing for officers to listen to, no number to trace, no voice to compare, only her account of what had been said. Lethbridge police did not shrug it off. A sitting alderwoman reporting a sexual harassment campaign is not a file you leave in a drawer. They opened a full investigation. Then the letters started. They arrived after she made the report, not before. They followed the same escalation as the calls. First admiration for her work on council, then pages of explicit material. Somebody, apparently, had graduated from the telephone to the mailbox. She also described a man outside the house at night, a shape in the dark near the property. The department committed real resources. They put a tap on the phone line. They installed surveillance cameras to watch for the prowler and for whoever was delivering the letters. And that is where the case began to come apart. The calls stopped, not gradually, immediately, effectively, the moment the line went live. The cameras ran and recorded nothing useful. No figure in the yard, no hand at the mailbox, no suspect of any kind. Worse, from the investigators' side, her descriptions of events kept failing to match what their own equipment had captured. Something would be reported to have happened at the house. The footage from that window of time would show an empty yard. That pattern held for 8 months. Every time the department moved toward the stalker evaporated. Every time they stepped back, he returned. Detectives working the file grew increasingly convinced that they were not chasing a man at all. They believed the letters were being written by the woman who was receiving them. But belief is not evidence, and the complainant was an elected official whose husband ran half the fire department. Accusing her publicly was a career-ending move if they were wrong, so they took a different route. They confronted her privately, before any charge existed and told her flatly that they thought she had invented him. That conversation happened in the spring of 2003. Weeks later, Dar Heatherington got into a car with the mayor and 5 other aldermen and crossed the border into Montana. Great Falls, Montana, first week of May 2003. A routine cross-border trip. Mayor Bob Tarlack and 5 members of Lethbridge Council sitting down with their American counterparts to talk trade, tourism, the ordinary business of 2 cities that share a highway. Saturday, May 3rd, was her last day there, and it was scheduled tight. Meetings in the morning, then the drive home, roughly 3 hours, because that evening her daughter had a piano recital and she intended to be in the audience. Around 9 that morning, she called David. She told him the meetings were going to run long. She would not make it back for the recital. An hour later, she canceled the meetings herself. There is no record of anyone asking her to stay. No delegation business kept her in Montana. She had manufactured a reason to be absent from home, then removed the reason and told nobody. That left a gap of several hours in the middle of a Saturday in a city where she knew almost no one. Before noon, she walked into a Great Falls pawn shop and bought a used mountain bike. She was friendly with the owner. She told him she wanted to ride the trail network that runs along the Missouri River, a paved system that follows the water for miles past the falls, past the dams, out toward open country. A woman on a work trip buying a bicycle on a warm Saturday to see the river. There is nothing sinister in that sentence. That is exactly why it worked. Sometime that afternoon, her rental car was located in a downtown parking lot. The driver's door area told a specific story. Her purse was on the ground beside the vehicle. Her keys were on the ground with it, both simply lying there on the asphalt in the open in the middle of a business district on a Saturday afternoon. Nothing had been taken, no cash pulled, no cards missing. The car was not damaged. There was no broken glass, no scuff pattern, no torn fabric, no blood, no scattered contents. The purse had not been emptied and discarded. It had been set down and left. To anyone driving past, it read as violence. To the detectives who eventually stood over it, it read as a display. Real abductions are messy and fast, and they leave a car that looks like a fight happened next to it. This one looked arranged, like a sentence someone wanted read from a distance. But nobody in Montana was thinking that yet. On the evening of May 3rd, all anyone knew was that a Canadian city councilor had not come home, and her purse was lying in a parking lot. David Heatherington reported his wife missing that night. The Great Falls Police Department had 19 detectives on its roster. Within a day, every one of them was working the same file. That does not happen for a routine missing adult. It happened here because of what she was, a foreign elected official, taken, apparently, off an American street while representing her city on official business. The diplomatic weight alone forced the response. So did the parking lot. Helicopters went up over the Missouri River corridor. Ground teams moved along the trail system she had described to the pawn shop owner, checking brush lines and the shoulders of the paved paths. Boat crews worked the water below the falls. The river there is fast and cold in early May, and it takes things a long way downstream before it gives them back. Investigators held 3 theories in parallel. Abduction. A stranger takes an unfamiliar woman from a downtown lot in daylight. Accident. She rode out on the trails alone, went into the water, and the current carried her. Suicide. A possibility they kept quietly on the list, because a woman who cancels her day and buys a bicycle to ride to a river is a pattern police have seen before. By the end, Cascade County had spent roughly $15,000 in public money on ground, water, and air operations. North of the border, Lethbridge stopped functioning normally. The story hit national television within 48 hours, then the international wires. City Hall staff fielded calls from reporters they had never heard of. Neighbors sat out in the evening wind and worked through the same short list of possibilities out loud. Her children were at home with a father who kept telling them their mother was coming back. The tone in the city was fear, not suspicion, fear. If a woman like that could be pulled off a street, then the rules everyone quietly relied on did not hold. Then, on the Tuesday, that tone cracked. Great Falls detectives had been talking to Lethbridge police for days, the way any department does when a missing person comes from another jurisdiction. In those conversations, the Canadians said something that changed the shape of the file. They had a history with this woman, 8 months of it. A stalker who left no trace, calls that stopped when the tap went on, cameras that recorded an empty yard, and a private conversation weeks earlier, in which officers told her to her face that they believed she had invented him. The Americans did not announce a conclusion. They added a fourth theory to the board, one nobody had wanted to write down while helicopters were still in the air. That she had staged it, that there was no man, that every detective in the department, every dollar spent, every hour on the water, had gone to chasing a woman who did not want to be found yet. They were still arguing about it when the phone rang from Nevada. Tuesday night, May 6th, Las Vegas. Outside the Treasure Island Casino, someone flagged down help for a woman who appeared badly disoriented. Police took her to University Medical Center. She was in good physical condition, no injuries requiring treatment, no sign of the 3 days of captivity she was about to describe. She told them she had been taken from a parking lot in Montana. Her husband flew down. They met in Vegas on the Wednesday and flew back to Great Falls together, where detectives were waiting with a file thick enough to see through her. The first account went like this. She was standing near her rental car that Saturday afternoon when a man grabbed her and forced her into his vehicle. He made her swallow something she could not identify. After that, the memory breaks. She surfaced roughly 1,300 miles south in Nevada, and it was possible she had been assaulted. She would not fill in the rest. No description of the man, no vehicle, no route, no motel, no explanation of how a drugged woman crossed 3 state lines without a single person noticing. The problems were immediate and they were structural. There was no struggle at the car. A man does not force an adult woman into a vehicle in a downtown lot on a Saturday without leaving marks on the pavement, on the paint, on her. Her purse and keys had been placed, not dropped. There were the canceled meetings. There was the phone call inventing meetings that no longer existed. There was a mountain bike bought hours before she vanished, from a man who remembered her as relaxed and chatty. And behind all of it sat 8 months of Lethbridge paperwork on a stalker nobody could photograph. Under questioning, the story changed. The second version, she had run into a fellow Albertan by chance in Great Falls, a married man. She agreed to ride with him toward California to see a friend in Culver City, and instead, they drove to Las Vegas and spent 2 nights there. She refused to give his name. She has never given it. Cascade County Attorney Brant Light had sat in on that interrogation. He charged her with giving a false statement to police, a misdemeanor carrying up to 6 months in jail and a $500 fine. And the moment the charge landed, she took the second story back. She returned to the first version, the stranger, the drug, the lost days. She has held that position without deviation ever since. 2 accounts, both from the same woman, hours apart. Only one of them had cost an American police department $15,000 and 3 days of every detective it owned. On May 20th, her lawyers reached an arrangement with Cascade County. No prosecution. She would pay a nominal amount toward court costs, attend counseling, and stay out of trouble for a year. She met the conditions, and the American charge was formally dropped in 2004. The deal had one practical purpose. Without a conviction, she could keep her seat. Lethbridge was not in a forgiving mood. The city that had spent 3 days terrified for her turned, almost overnight, into something colder. Her house was vandalized. Neighbors stopped speaking to the family. Her children found their friends pulling away at school, not because of anything the children had done, but because parents had made decisions at dinner tables. David stood by her publicly. He told reporters he did not know every detail of what had happened to his wife, but he could confirm there were bruises on her body. In June 2003, she faced the press and said she was not lying, that the only mistake she had made was trusting a stranger. She said she now understood why most sexual assault victims never come forward. That same month, Lethbridge police closed their 8-month investigation the only way the evidence allowed. On June 10th, she was charged with public mischief for the stalker. The trial ran into 2004. On June 29th, Assistant Chief Judge Peter Cafaro convicted her, and he did not soften it. He described her as a person who could not be trusted to tell the truth. Under Alberta law, that conviction disqualified her from office. She refused to resign. Council began court proceedings to remove her. She finally stepped down effective September 10th, saying she needed the time to clear her name. She was sentenced to house arrest. She breached its terms and was convicted again the following year. In 2005, she dropped her appeal. Not long after, the Hetheringtons filed for bankruptcy. No one was hurt in Great Falls. That is the strange part. A career, a marriage's privacy, a family's standing, an American department's budget, all of it spent on a crime that never happened. And the real cost stayed behind in Lethbridge. Every woman who walked into that station afterward with a stalker and no proof walked in carrying her shadow. Sleet, a border road in County Leitrim, 4 miles outside Ballinamore. Headlights catch something red in the middle of the tarmac, and the woman behind the wheel takes it for a traffic bollard. It isn't. It's a man, barefoot, wrapped in plastic sheeting, a white beard down to his chest, fingernails grown long. Across his forehead, printed in black ink, one word: thief. He had been missing for 8 months. Ireland was about to spend 6 weeks hunting the men who took him. There were no men. He did this to himself. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Kevin Michael McGeever was born in Swinford, a market town in County Mayo in the west of Ireland, the kind of place where everyone knows whose son you are. He left it behind early, and he kept leaving. Australia, the United States, continental Europe. By the time he was middle-aged, he had crossed 4 continents, and along the way, he had learned the one trade he would practice for the next 30 years. He sold people the future. Not houses, not land, the idea of them. His vehicle was a company called KMM International Properties. His market was Dubai during its wildest years, a city rising out of sand so fast that nothing about it seemed impossible. Man-made islands, towers with private beaches, apartments sold off-plan before the concrete was poured, before the site was cleared, sometimes before the site existed at all. His clients were mostly Irish and British. Ordinary people, in many cases, with extraordinary optimism. Nurses, publicans, small contractors, men who had made money in the Celtic Tiger years and were terrified of watching it sit still. They handed over deposits, tens of thousands each. Investigators would later trace something in the region of €70 million moving through McGeever's hands over the length of his career. And he was good. That is the part people struggle with. He was not a crude operator. He was courteous, softly spoken, generous with his time, well-read. He remembered the names of your children. He wore his authority lightly, which is exactly what made it convincing. A man who never had to insist he was rich, because he lived like it. In County Galway, in the village of Crawwell, he bought a country house and spent €4.5 million turning it into a monument. Electric gates, manicured grounds, a fleet in the garage, including a Porsche. He named the place Nirvana. He meant it seriously. That is worth sitting with for a moment. A man who names his home after the end of all suffering and puts the sign up at the gate where everyone driving past can read it. Then the sand stopped rising. When the global economy folded in on itself, Dubai's off-plan market went with it. Projects stalled at foundation level. Cranes stood still over half-finished towers. And all across Ireland, people who had wired deposits to a company selling apartments in the desert began doing the same arithmetic at their kitchen tables and reaching for the phone. At first, the answers were reassuring. Delays, paperwork, currency issues, a temporary problem with a bank in Liechtenstein. McGeever was a fluent man, and a fluent man can hold a collapse together for a surprisingly long time with nothing but a telephone. But the calls did not stop, and they changed in tone. Solicitors' letters arrived, judgments were entered. In the United Arab Emirates, authorities opened a fraud file with his name on it. The gates at Crawwell were no longer keeping the world out. The world had the address, and it was writing to him weekly. At home, something worse was happening. His partner, Siobhan O'Callaghan, had been diagnosed with cancer. She was seriously ill through all of it. The letters, the phone calls, the men turning up unannounced at the gate. In the spring of 2012, McGeever began quietly putting his affairs in order. He moved the Porsche and other cars out of the garage at Nirvana and left them with a friend for safekeeping. It looked, at the time, like a man protecting assets from creditors. Nobody read it as preparation. May 27, 2012 was the last day anyone saw him at the house. And here is the first detail that should have made everyone stop. He was not reported missing for almost a month. It was June 22nd before a formal report went into Gardaí. A missing person, that stale, is barely a case at all. The scent is cold, the timeline is guesswork, and in the eyes of any experienced officer, there is a far likelier explanation than abduction. A heavily indebted man with international connections and a fraud file open abroad had simply gone. People do that. People with far less pressure than Kevin McGeever do that. No ransom demand came, no proof of life, no contact of any kind. 8 months passed. January 29th, 2013, a Tuesday, Catherine Vallely was driving home from a night riding class with her friend Peter Ryhill beside her. Their road ran south from Swanlinbar, a village that sits a couple of 100 yards from the border with Northern Ireland, down through open country toward Ballinamore. Smuggling country, historically. Bad light, worse weather. Sleet coming in sideways across the windscreen, the wipers losing as often as they won. Around 9:40 p.m., about 4 miles short of the town, something red showed up at the edge of the headlights. She thought it was a bollard. Then it moved. They stopped. What came toward the car was a man of about 68, and the first thing Vallely registered was that he was skin and bone, hollow cheeks, enormous eyes and a face with nothing left on it, a white beard that reached the middle of his chest. His nails had not been cut in months. He was soaked through, wrapped in a length of plastic sheeting, and he had no shoes. He got into the back seat, the car filled with the smell of wet wool and cold skin. He told them 3 men had thrown him out of the back of a van. He did not know what county he was in. He did not know the month. He was carrying 2 things, a flashlight, brand new, and a mobile phone containing exactly 1 saved number, and he was polite. That is the detail everyone who met him that night came back to. Articulate, well-spoken, apologetic about the state of the upholstery. He gave them a name. It was not his own, a different first name, and an address in Dublin. He asked them to drive him to Carrick-on-Shannon, 17 miles to the southwest. There was a man there he needed to reach, he said. They said no. They said they were taking him to the Garda station in Ballinamore. He did not argue. He simply went quiet in the back seat while the sleet ran down the windows. Under the station lights, they saw the rest of it. Across his forehead, printed in black ink, was the word thief. A young officer took his details while somebody made tea. He ate biscuits, then more biscuits, then an order of chips brought over from the takeaway, and he ate the way people eat when the body has stopped negotiating with the mind. He was calm, almost gracious about it. Within hours, he was in the Midlands Hospital in Mullingar. The medical picture was serious. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, a fractured kneecap. Staff noted marks on his wrists and around his ankles, the kind of marks left by long restraint. By morning, the man who had given a false name at a rural Garda station had been identified. The missing millionaire was alive. The account he gave, once he began giving it, never wavered. He had been in the grounds of his home at Crawwell in the last week of May, when 3 masked men came through the garden. one of them had a gun. They put him in a vehicle and drove, and after that, he lost track of geography entirely. Where he ended up, he said, was a steel container, buried, roughly 20 feet underground. No light of any kind, no heating, no sanitation. He was fed enough to keep him alive and not much more. He was tied. He was beaten. He was told repeatedly that he would be killed. His captors, he said, wanted millions for his release, money he no longer had. And when it became clear no one was paying, they simply drove him to the border country and put him out of the back of a van into the sleet. 8 months in a hole in the ground, in the dark. Over the following weeks, he would give Gardaí 8 separate statements to that effect. The story went around the world inside 48 hours. Property tycoon, buried alive. The word carved into his forehead. That was how the international press ran it initially, and a Garda superintendent had to publicly correct the record. It was written in ink, not cut into the skin. He added that the man was vague on almost every specific, and that all of it, for now, remained an allegation. That caution did nothing. The vacuum filled itself. Reporters wrote that the Russian mafia had taken him. Others pointed at dissident Republican groups, or at the cross-border smuggling networks that had operated in that stretch of country for generations. A ransom of $10 million was mentioned. Every theory was plausible precisely because nothing was verifiable. And in Leitrim, the temperature dropped. Ballinamore is a small town. Suddenly, it had satellite trucks on the square, and strangers with cameras asking farmers whether they had noticed any unusual excavation on their land. Because that was the implication nobody could shake. If the story was true, somebody within driving distance had buried a steel box in a field and kept a man in it since spring. People started looking twice at outbuildings they had passed every day of their lives. Doors that had never been locked were locked. 19 Gardaí were assigned. Most of them worked on nothing else. The first thing a kidnapping investigation needs is a place. Find the room, and the forensics do the rest. There was no room. He could not say what direction he had been driven, how long the journey took, whether the ground above him was field or yard. He had heard no traffic, no church bell, no livestock. Detectives walked him through it again and again, and what came back was fog. 8 months in one location, and not a single anchor point. So they worked outward instead. They went to the intelligence, the organized crime files, the dissident Republican files, the border networks. If a gang had held a wealthy man underground for the best part of a year, somebody in that world talks. Nobody talked. No chatter, no sighting, no informant. And the Garda position, stated publicly, was that there was no definite intelligence of gang involvement at all. They went at the money, and the money went nowhere. No ransom demand on record. No contact with the family. No proof of life sent to anyone. Then, the medical picture began to argue with the story. The weight loss was real, and visibly so. But a man of 68 kept for 8 months in an unheated steel box through an Irish winter without sanitation should have arrived at Mullingar in a state of catastrophic collapse, pressure sores, respiratory infection, rotting skin on the feet. Apart from the starvation, he was in remarkably good condition. And there were the eyes. 8 months in total darkness does something to human sight. Under station lights, he should have been half blind, streaming, unable to look up. His eyes were fine. Small things kept surfacing. The flashlight was new. The ink on his forehead washed off. The one number on that phone belonged to the friend minding his Porsche. And before anyone reached a Garda station, his first instinct had been to get himself driven quietly to that man instead. Then came the strangest report in the entire file. An investor named Kevin Cook, one of the people owed money, told Gardaí he had been grabbed by 2 masked men and taken to see McGeever in captivity. He was shown the prisoner and told the captors wanted $10 million and that without it, the man would die. It was theater. Gardaí came to believe Cook had been brought there for one purpose, to be a witness. A credible messenger who would go back to the other creditors and tell them what McGeever needed them to believe, that he had nothing left. not a euro, not even enough to buy his own life. The lead detective, John Keating, reached the conclusion his file had been pointing at for weeks. Nobody had taken this man. On March 14th, 2013, Garda E arrested him at Crowell, not for a fraud, not for a debt, but for wasting their time. He was taken to the station at Gort and interviewed 4 times. Through the first 3 he held, same abduction, same masked men, same container 20 feet down. He was courteous throughout. Courtesy buys patience, and patience buys time. He spent the night in a cell. In the 4th interview, on March 15th, it came apart. He told them there had been no kidnappers, no container, no hole in the ground. He had never left the west of Ireland. He had spent those 8 months in an isolated cottage, and he had starved himself down to the bone on purpose. He had grown the beard, let the nails go, marked his own forehead, and arranged to be dropped on a remote border road in bad weather, where he would be found by strangers rather than by anyone who knew him. The reason was the one thing in the case that had never been complicated. He was drowning in debt he could not pay. Creditors were circling. If they believed he had been taken, tortured, and stripped of everything, they would stop. He was, he said afterwards, relieved to have it off his chest. He thanked the detectives for their work. He had never intended to make a complaint at all. That part was an accident. He only ever meant to be seen. And a woman on a wet road refused to drop him anywhere except a Garda station. The bill was read into the record 3 years later. 19 officers, a 6-week investigation, 3,038 man-hours, and 86,851 euros of public money spent chasing men who did not exist. Every hour of it was an hour not spent on somebody who really was missing. Siobhan O'Callaghan died later that same year. Whatever he had been buying time for, he did not get it. In April 2016, at Galway Circuit Criminal Court, a jury panel filed in, and Kevin McGeever, by then 71, living in Dublin, the mansion long gone, pleaded guilty moments before his trial was due to start. 2 counts of giving false information to Garda E. His voice, reporters noted, was barely audible. The sentence was 2 years, suspended in full. The court's reasoning had a certain bleak logic to it. The state had already spent enough of the taxpayers' money on this man. There was nothing to be gained by spending more of it keeping him in a cell. 30 years of selling things that did not exist, and the last thing he sold was himself. He starved his own body down to a fact no creditor could argue with. It bought him nothing. The investors were never repaid. Nirvana was gone. The woman he came back for was dead inside the year. He was never kidnapped. He was only ever held by the story he told. He didn't want her dead. He wanted an audience. The plan was simple enough that he explained it to his own brother. Take the girl, hide her, come back a few hours later without the mask, find her himself, and let the town call him a hero. He never got to that part. By the time he opened the tailgate of his father's pickup, the 15-year-old lying in the bed had already stopped breathing. No rescue, no crowd, just a body in the woods off Route 43, and a story he would spend the next 2 years refusing to tell. Glenburn, Maine, Mother's Day, 2013. Glenburn sits about 10 miles north of Bangor, a scatter of houses and gravel driveways pressed up against second-growth pine. Fewer than 4,000 people, no downtown to speak of. The kind of place where the school bus route doubles as a social map. You know every family by which mailbox they stop at. Nichole Cable lived at the end of Spruce Lane, a narrow dead-end road with no streetlights and a tree line that starts about 15 feet from the pavement. She shared the house with her mother, Christine Wiley, her stepfather Jason, and her younger siblings. She was 15, 5'3", 90 pounds. A sophomore at Old Town High School. Photographs from that spring show a girl with long dark hair and a habit of tilting her chin down when she smiled. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Friends described her the way people describe teenagers who are genuinely well-liked rather than merely popular. She noticed when someone was left out. She had a best friend, Tyler Ann. She had a phone that was rarely more than an arm's length away. That last detail matters more than it should. Because in a town this size, a 15-year-old's real social life doesn't happen at school. It happens after 9 at night, on a screen, in a network of people who all live within a 15-minute drive of one another. Everyone is a mutual friend of everyone. A message request from a familiar name doesn't feel like a message from a stranger. It feels like the same 20 people you've known since elementary school, rearranged. There is no filter because there has never seemed to be any reason for one. The wider geography of the case fits in a box roughly 12 miles across. Glenburn to the west, Old Town to the northeast, a mill town on the Penobscot where the high school was. Orono in between, home to the university and to a family named Doob. Running along the eastern edge of it all, the Stillwater River, and beside the river, Route 43, a 2-lane road with logging cuts and gravel turnouts, breaking off into dense woods on both sides. Every one of those places is within a 20-minute drive of Spruce Lane. That spring, Nichole was doing ordinary 15-year-old things, arguing with her mother about curfew, trading messages late into the night, making weekend plans she didn't always clear in advance. Sunday, May 12th, 2013 was Mother's Day. She spent most of it at home. Kyle Doob was 20 years old, from Orono, and by any outside measure, he was already an adult with adult obligations. He worked as a caregiver for a woman with mental health problems. He had a girlfriend, Sarah Mersinger. He had a young child. He was 5'9", 170 pounds, and he moved through the same small orbit of houses and back roads as everyone else in the case. He knew Nichole. That was never in dispute. They had been friendly for a couple of months, and they talked about seeing each other that spring. But friendly was where it stopped, and that was the problem. Doob wanted a sexual relationship with her. She had turned him down, not dramatically, not publicly, just the ordinary refusal of a 15-year-old who wasn't interested in a 20-year-old with a girlfriend. To Nichole, it was probably a closed subject within a week. To Doob, it wasn't closed at all. What follows is the psychological center of this case, and it's worth sitting with, because it isn't rage and it isn't a sudden loss of control. It's something colder and more juvenile than either. Doob didn't respond to rejection by trying to change her mind or by moving on. He responded by trying to change the circumstances, to engineer a situation in which she would have no choice but to see him differently. He wanted to be owed something, gratitude, admiration, the specific, unearnable kind of credit that goes to a person who saves someone. So he built a stranger. In the weeks before her disappearance, a Facebook profile appeared under the name Brian Butterfield. The name wasn't invented. Brian Butterfield was a real person, someone Nichole knew, though she hadn't seen him in months, and someone Sarah Mersinger had dated in the past. Doob picked a name that would clear every instinctive check a teenager makes before accepting a request. Not a stranger, not a fake-sounding profile, a face from the same 20-mile circle. Nichole accepted. What happened next was patient, which is the detail that makes this hard to read as impulsive. The account didn't lunge, it talked. Investigators would later describe the contact between Nichole and the fake Butterfield as frequent. An ongoing conversation running for days, building the ordinary intimacy of teenage messaging. And threaded through it, over and over, was a single request. Meet up. Just for a few minutes. Just at the end of your road. She kept declining, or deferring, or not answering. So he found the one thing that would move her. The account offered her marijuana. That was the hook. Small, mundane, and exactly calibrated to a 15-year-old who would refuse a meeting but not a favor. Nothing about it required her to trust a stranger. It only required her to walk to the end of her own driveway, on her own road, in a town where nothing happens. She agreed. Sunday evening at the house on Spruce Lane was unremarkable. Christine had spent the day with her kids. Nichole was on her phone. Sometime that evening, she told a friend what she was doing. She was going to meet Brian, just down the road. She'd be right back. She didn't take a jacket. She didn't take much of anything. It was 100 yards from the porch to the end of the lane. She walked out sometime after 9. He was already there. Doob had parked his father's pickup nearby and positioned himself in the brush at the end of the road, off the shoulder, in the black space between the tree line and the gravel. He was wearing a ski mask. He had duct tape with him, brought deliberately in advance, the way a person brings a tool for a job they have already thought through. He had also cut a hole in a hat. That detail would matter enormously later. At the time, it was just one more piece of a costume assembled by a 20-year-old who had watched too much television and understood almost nothing about how evidence works. Spruce Lane at 9 at night in May is dark in a way that people from cities don't quite believe. No streetlights, no neighbor's porch light close enough to matter. The nearest sound is the road a half-mile off. Black flies were out. The ground under the pines was still soft from the spring melt. She came down the road. He came out of the bushes. What happened in the next 60 seconds is the only part of this case that has never been described by anyone who was there and willing to tell the truth. What we have is physical evidence and what Doob himself said afterward. She fought. That much is certain. Her fingernails carried his DNA. Skin under a 15-year-old's nails is not a passive detail. It means contact and pressure and a struggle at close range. He got the tape on her, over her mouth, over her nose. A hat came off in the dirt, a sock, one black sneaker. Then he put her in the bed of his father's pickup truck and drove. Here is where the plan simply evaporates. Doob's intention, as he described it to his own brother, was to hide her, leave her somewhere, wait, then return without the mask, discover her, and be seen carrying her back out of the woods. He had thought about the ending. He had not thought about the middle. He had not thought about what duct tape across a person's nose and mouth does to a person who cannot use her hands. She was tied and gagged in the open bed of a moving truck. He was in the cab. When he stopped and went around to get her out, she was dead. The medical examiner's finding was asphyxiation. She suffocated, not in a struggle, not by force applied in a moment of rage. She suffocated slowly, restrained, while the man who had planned it all drove somewhere else and thought about how the rescue would look. What Doob did next was pure panic, and it left a trail across 3 towns. He drove northeast toward Old Town. He turned off onto Route 43, the 2-lane that runs alongside the Stillwater River, and pulled into the woods near a gas station, a stretch of trees a short walk from a road that hundreds of people drive every day. He carried her in. He put her down among the leaves and covered her with sticks and branches. Not a grave, not concealment in any serious sense. A pile of brush thrown over a body by someone who wanted it out of sight for the length of time it took him to leave. Then he drove back. On the way, he rolled down the window of the truck and threw her clothes out onto the roadside. By the time he reached home, the plan he'd built for weeks, the ski mask, the borrowed name, the marijuana, the hero's return, had produced exactly one outcome. A 15-year-old under a pile of branches 8 miles from her mother's house. He told his girlfriend. He told his brother. And then he waited to see what the town would do. Christine Wiley called the Penobscot County Sheriff's Office at 8:27 on the morning of May 13th. Her daughter had gone out the night before to meet a friend at the end of the driveway. She had not come back. Her phone was going unanswered. Missing teenagers are a category law enforcement handles with a certain amount of caution. Most of them are found within 48 hours at a friend's house, angry about something. But the details here didn't fit the pattern. Nichole hadn't taken anything with her. There was no argument. She had walked 100 yards down her own road and stopped existing. By midday, the search was underway. Within days, it had grown into one of the largest in the county's recent memory. Sheriff's deputies, Maine State Police, game wardens, K-9 teams, aircraft overhead. Then the civilians. hundreds of them organized out of a fire station, working grid lines through swamp and second-growth pine in weather that couldn't decide between spring and winter. The social effect on a town of 4,000 was immediate and total. Glenburn had no framework for this. Parents who had never thought twice about the walk to the mailbox started driving their kids to the end of the road and waiting with the engine running. Christine stopped letting her younger children ride the school bus because the bus stop was the place where her daughter had last been seen alive. Rumors filled the vacuum the way they always do. She'd run off with an older boyfriend. She'd been taken by someone passing through on the interstate. Someone had seen a car that didn't belong. Each theory ran for a day or two, collapsed, and was replaced. Underneath all of it was a suspicion that nobody wanted to say out loud in a place where everyone is somebody's cousin. That whoever did this was standing in one of the search lines. He was. Kyle Doob did not run. He did not go quiet. He inserted himself directly into the aftermath, which is the behavior of someone who believes proximity looks like innocence. He talked about the case. He kept in contact with people close to the family. At one point, he offered Christine Wiley his help. He volunteered to babysit her other children while she was out searching for the daughter he had left under a pile of branches. There is no evidence that this was calculation of any sophistication. It reads instead like a man who had built an entire fantasy around being the person who helps, and who could not let go of the role even after the plot that was supposed to earn it had killed someone. Meanwhile, the search itself was producing things. Not a body, small things, scattered near the end of Spruce Lane and the wooded ground beside it. Searchers turned up a black sneaker, a sock, and a hat with a hole cut into it. Investigators bagged all three without knowing yet what any of them meant. In the moment, they were three ordinary objects in a state where the roadside is full of ordinary objects. Two of them would eventually carry DNA. 8 days passed. The volunteer lines kept moving outward, a mile, then 3, then farther, following the logic that a body left by a driver would be near a road. That logic was correct. They were simply searching the wrong roads. The first version of this case that detectives had to work with was almost entirely wrong. The initial framing, repeated in early coverage, was that Nichole had gone out to meet someone she'd recently met online. A stranger, an internet predator, a man who could have driven in from anywhere. That theory pointed investigators outward, toward highways and license plates and other states. It was demolished within days by a 16-year-old. Nichole's best friend, Tyler Ann Harris, told reporters flatly that Nichole knew Kyle Doob. They'd been friendly for a couple of months and had talked about meeting up that weekend. Whatever this was, it wasn't a faceless stranger from the internet. The second theory was the runaway. It survived less than a day because everything she owned was still in the house. The third was the one detectives actually had to work at, because there really was a Brian Butterfield. He was a real man with a real address, and Nichole had been messaging him for days before she disappeared. On paper, he was the last person she communicated with, and the person she walked down the road to meet. They brought him in. Butterfield told them he knew Nichole but hadn't seen her in several months. He hadn't messaged her. He hadn't arranged anything. Someone had built an account in his name. Detectives checked. He was telling the truth. He wasn't involved, and the profile carrying his name was fraudulent. Then Butterfield gave them something they hadn't asked for. He told investigators he suspected who had made it. He knew Kyle Doob wanted to have sex with Nichole. He knew she had refused him. That was May 13th, the day after. The name was on the table almost immediately. Having a name and being able to prove anything are different problems. Investigators went into Nichole's own Facebook account and read the conversation from her side. The volume of contact with the fake Butterfield profile was substantial and recent, and the pattern was unmistakable. The account had pushed repeatedly for an in-person meeting and had finally succeeded by offering her marijuana on the night she vanished. They sent a request to Facebook for the subscriber records behind the account. The answer came back pointing at a residence in Orono, the home of Kyle Doob's parents. Cell tower data told a second story. On the night of May 12th, Doob's phone was in the area of Nichole's home. On May 15th, detectives interviewed him directly. He admitted a relationship with her. He confirmed he'd texted her earlier that day, and he told them he had been working in Bangor that night. The phone records said otherwise. Doob also consented to give a DNA sample, a decision that suggests he had no idea what had already been recovered from the roadside on Spruce Lane. His DNA came back on the hat with the hole cut in it. His DNA was on the sock, so was Nichole's. And when investigators looked at him closely during that interview, he had scratches on him. The case was assembling itself. What it still lacked was the one thing that turns a missing person file into a homicide. On May 20th, Doob's older brother Dustin sat down with investigators and repeated what Kyle had told him. That he'd arranged for Nichole to meet him down the road from her house. That he'd waited in the woods in a ski mask with duct tape. That he'd jumped out and taken her, taped her, put her in their father's pickup. That when he pulled her out of the truck, she was dead. That he'd dumped her in the woods near the Dysart's gas station in Old Town, covered in sticks. And the sentence that defined the whole case, that he had intended to hide her, then find her later and be the hero. Sarah Mersinger told police a nearly identical version, with one addition. He'd thrown Nichole's clothes out the truck window on the way back. That night, searchers went to the woods along the Stillwater River off Route 43. They found her under leaves and branches, bound, gagged, 8 days after she walked down her own driveway. The medical examiner confirmed the identification on May 22nd and later ruled the cause of death asphyxiation. Kyle Doob was arrested the following day and charged with murder. He appeared in court in ripped jeans and a white t-shirt, and Christine Wiley stood up from her seat and stared at him until her husband made her sit back down. State Police Detective Thomas Pickering's affidavit, the document containing his brother's account, was sealed, then unsealed when the grand jury handed up an indictment for murder and kidnapping. Roughly 300 people came to her funeral. The trial opened in Bangor in late February 2015. Doob never took the stand. His defense conceded nothing. His attorneys argued the state had rushed to judgment, that other people had access to his computer and phone, and that someone else could have operated the fake profile. They pointed at his girlfriend, suggesting she disliked Nichole and had the opportunity. Doob, they said, had been home with his family that night. The prosecution answered with the profile traced to his household, the cell records placing him near Spruce Lane, his DNA on the hat and the sock, his DNA under Nichole's fingernails, the scratches on his body, and the people he had told. The jury of 7 men and 5 women took 45 minutes. Guilty on both counts, March 6, 2015. At sentencing that May, Christine Wiley told the court her younger children were afraid the bad man would come back, and that she no longer let them ride the bus because the end of the road was where her daughter was killed. She asked for no mercy. Justice Anne Murray called it an unprovoked, senseless killing. She noted his contact with other girls on Facebook before Nichole. 60 years for murder, 30 concurrent for kidnapping. Doob said nothing, no explanation, no apology. His appeal failed. He is held at the Maine State Prison in Warren, eligible for release in 2065. Everything he built was designed for an audience that never arrived. The borrowed name, the weeks of messages, the mask, the tape, the hat with the hole cut in it, all of it engineering toward a single imagined moment. Kyle Doob walking out of the trees, carrying a girl who would finally have to be grateful to him. He was never owed that. He decided he was. Outside the courthouse, Christine Wiley said she was still waiting for him to own up to it. She wanted to know what her daughter's last words were, whether she'd screamed for her mother or her father. He has never said. Labor Day evening, 2009. A woman stumbles across a mall parking lot in Orange Park, Florida. Torn shirt, raw zip tie marks on her wrists. A soda can crushed into a blade in her fist. She finds a sheriff's deputy. She tells him 3 armed men took her from her home, that she has been held for 3 days. Then, she cuts him with the can while he is trying to help her. The marks were real. The 3 days were real. The men were not, because she had written the ransom note herself in her own handwriting and left it on her own dining room table. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Ponte Vedra Beach sits about 20 miles southeast of Jacksonville, a strip of St. Johns County where the golf courses run down to the Atlantic and the mailing address alone is a credential. The gray home stood on Ponte Vedra Boulevard, close enough to the water that the salt worked on the door hardware. 2 stories, 2 young daughters, a marriage approaching its 10th year. Reed Gray was 38 and ran a home health care company. Quinn was 37 and did not work outside the house. From the road, the arrangement looked settled, the kind of household that generates no police reports and no gossip worth repeating. The interior was less stable. By 2009, the marriage was under a strain. Neither of them was hiding well from the people closest to them. There was alcohol. There was a psychiatric history that her attorneys would later place at the center of her defense, describing years of treatment and a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Money was not the problem. The house was worth several $million, and nothing in the family's finances suggested pressure. Hold on to that, because the sum soon demanded for Quinn Gray's life was $50,000. Not a fortune, not a number scaled to the address, an amount her husband could assemble in a single afternoon without selling anything. Somebody had picked a figure that would definitely get paid. About 25 miles inland, on the industrial fringe of Jacksonville, a 25-year-old named Jasmine Osmanovic ran an auto repair warehouse. He had been born in Bosnia. He drove a white Volkswagen hatchback. He had a girlfriend, Callie Bowers, a sister named Valida, and a business that ran on cash and other people's broken vehicles. Investigators never fully mapped how the two of them met. What Osmanovic eventually told detectives was that the relationship began roughly 6 weeks before Labor Day and was sexual almost immediately. He said he had been inside the house on Ponte Vedra Boulevard on multiple occasions, that they had used the family home when it was empty. He said she talked to him at length about her marriage, her money, her children. A woman in her late 30s from an oceanfront address, and a man 12 years younger working out of a shop with a permanently stained floor. They had almost nothing in common except the arrangement itself, and it suited both of them. But Osmanovic had one habit that would decide the entire case, and it came from a simple instinct. He did not trust her. So he bought a digital recorder, and he kept it running. He recorded the sex. He recorded the conversations. He recorded her voice in his warehouse in the weeks before she disappeared, and he hid the files in a dresser drawer at his girlfriend's house. Insurance, taken out by a man who had already worked out that if this ever came apart, it would come apart on him. Friday, September 4th, 2009, the start of the Labor Day weekend. Around 7 that evening, Reed Gray called 911. He told the dispatcher he had heard from his wife, that she said she had been taken from the house by 3 men he did not know, and that they wanted money. Then he found the letter. It was on the dining room table, 2 pages. It said 3 men were holding her and wanted $50,000 in cash. It told him to stay at the house, no police, keep his cell phone on him, keep the children with him. It ended with her asking him to do this, please, for her. The handwriting was hers. Nobody doubted that, then or later. That was the point of it. What happened next was not a routine missing person response. A ransom note inside a home in one of the wealthiest zip codes in Northeast Florida triggers a different machine entirely. A SWAT team rolled to the address on Ponte Vedra Boulevard. The St. Johns County Sheriff's Office took the call, and the FBI was in it within hours, because a kidnapping for ransom is federal the moment anybody says the word. By the time the weekend was over, roughly 150 law enforcement personnel would be working this case. The early theory built itself. Quinn had been getting ready to collect her daughters when she was taken. Whoever did it had known exactly when the house would be empty of witnesses. That detail set the tone, because if these men would grab a mother an hour before the school run, there was no floor to what came next. Nobody in that command post considered, on the first night, that the woman they were hunting for had chosen those words herself. Saturday morning, Quinn called the house at 10:42. Reed, sitting in a police command center by then, told her he had the money. She said they would get back to him. They got back to him 40 minutes later. Her instructions were specific. Drive down Butler Boulevard, turn left onto South Side, hold the bag out the window so somebody could take it on the move. If he did not do exactly this, she said, he was going to get her killed. Half an hour later, the plan changed. Now he was to continue down South Side to the Chick-fil-A near Phillips Highway, put the top down on his convertible, and wait. At 12:27, she called again, and this time she was frantic. He had ruined it. They had spotted federal cars in the area. The exchange was off. To the investigators, the pattern read as an amateur crew losing its nerve. In hindsight, it reads as somebody running her husband in circles across Jacksonville to see whether he had brought the police. At 2 o'clock Sunday morning, Quinn's mother, Gail Sykes, arrived in town. Within hours, the rules changed again. Quinn told the family her captors were finished dealing with Reed. Her mother would be the new point of contact. So a woman who had driven through the night to find her daughter was handed the bag of cash and sent out alone. At 10:30, she was directed to Mickler's Landing, to a portable toilet at the beach access, where a note was waiting. It sent her on to a Joe's Crab Shack in Jacksonville Beach. Drop the money, do not look back. If anything went wrong, her daughter would be dead. She made the drop. And then the weekend produced the one thing nobody had scripted. 4 college students found the bag first. They opened it, saw $50,000 in cash, and immediately decided they were being followed by drug dealers. They pulled over. They called the police. They handed the entire ransom back to law enforcement. At 11:30, a man came on the phone, a slight accent, the first male voice in the entire operation, demanding to know where the money had gone. Sykes was told to go back and do it again. He was angry now. He said they would be in touch. That evening, there was another drop in Jacksonville Beach. It failed too. Sykes spent hours moving from location to location on the instructions of people she had never seen, carrying cash for a daughter she believed was tied up in a room somewhere. By the end of Sunday night, she had accomplished nothing at all. Monday, September 7th, 6 in the evening, Orange Park Mall in Clay County, roughly 30 miles from her front door. She appeared in the parking lot on foot. A sheriff's deputy was flagged down and told who she was and what had happened to her. She was agitated past the point of coherence, and in the middle of him trying to help her, she opened his skin with the aluminum edge of the can she was carrying. She was taken to the FBI field office in Jacksonville. There, over several hours, she gave her first full account. 3 men had come into her house. They were Albanian, they had a gun. They took her because her husband owed money, $75,000 borrowed from a loan shark, though the men had been willing to settle at $50,000. She had been bound at the wrists with zip ties. She had been held somewhere she could not identify. The agents in that room had spent 3 days believing exactly this scenario. It matched the note. It matched the calls. It matched the accented male voice on the phone with her mother. But there was a hole in the center of it, and it was not a small one. She never explained how she got out. 3 armed men, a gun, restraints, a debt still unpaid. And then, somehow, a 37-year-old woman is loose in a shopping mall parking lot in the next county with nobody watching her. She was asked how the ordeal ended. She did not answer it. She was also asked that first night whether she would submit to a polygraph examination. She said no. The next morning, she told the sheriff's office that not everything she had said the night before was accurate, and added something new. She had been sexually assaulted. She was taken to a hospital and examined. The initial findings indicated no signs of trauma. On September 9th, she told it again, differently. Now there was 1 man, not 3. He had been waiting in a bedroom closet wearing yellow dishwashing gloves. He had a gun. He said her husband had borrowed money and he had come to collect. He used zip ties on her, drove her to a building she described as a warehouse or a chop shop, and raped her there. Then she kept talking. She volunteered a level of sexual detail nobody had asked for and nobody could use. Her own physical responses, what her captor preferred, how often he wanted it. 2 of the days, she said, had been spent at the Emerson Inn on Phillips Highway. She had been left alone many times. She had never tried to leave because she was protecting her family. She had told him about her marriage, her finances, her children. Real accounts narrow with each retelling. Hers expanded. Meanwhile, the threats kept arriving. A wallet turned up in the gray driveway. Inside was a note with further money instructions and a warning for her husband. He was being watched through a rifle scope. He was the first target, and the shooter claimed to have put a round through the soda can from her hand at 730 yards. She had been released, the note said, only on her word that she would stay quiet. The debt was still open. On September 10th, she agreed to the polygraph. She failed it. While she sat for that examination, another letter was found outside the FBI's Ponte Vedra office. This one addressed to a local television reporter. It complained that Reed had been given 3 chances to save his wife and hung up the phone. It claimed he was the adulterer, that he had a drinking problem. It insisted Quinn was being dragged through the mud and was not a lunatic. Nobody had publicly called her anything. For the next several days, detectives drove her around Northeast Florida looking for the warehouse. She could not find it. She helped produce a composite sketch of the man instead. On September 11th, detectives drove to the Emerson Inn. The owner remembered them, so did a tenant, a woman and a European-looking man in and out over the holiday weekend, driving a white Volkswagen hatchback. Nobody restrained, nobody in distress. They described the 2 of them as a couple. The next day, Quinn called the sheriff's office, upset that her sketch had not been released to the media. She also wanted to know why nobody had gone to the Publix near Mickler's Landing, where her kidnapper had bought chicken wings, an Italian sub, and paper. The detective noted something quietly. She had never mentioned a grocery store before. They pulled the security video anyway, and there he was, buying exactly what she had described. She confirmed it without hesitation, and the images went to the press. She had just handed investigators a photograph of the man she said had abducted her. On September 13th, she drove around with her mother, still hunting for the building. Nothing. On September 14th, she announced she had found it, the warehouse, and the vehicle she had been kept in all weekend. The address led to Jasmine Osmanovich. He agreed to be interviewed and opened with a lie. He did not know her. He had spent the weekend with a woman named Stacy. It held briefly. Then he confirmed all of it. The 6 weeks, the visits to her house, the warehouse, the motel. Consensual, he said, every hour of it. He had never tied her up. She had her own phone and came and went as she pleased. And he could prove it because he had recordings. The search of his vehicle produced zip ties. It also produced a black bag holding jewelry, a check stub, and Reed Gray's passport, plus a crumpled scrap of paper carrying Osmanovich's first name and cell number in Quinn's handwriting. Her purse was sitting in his shop. He was arrested on a charge of threats or extortion. The next day, his girlfriend came forward. He had called her from jail and told her where the recordings were. A dresser drawer at her house. She had passed them to his sister, who handed them over through an attorney. Detectives listened to the 2 of them rehearsing. The yellow gloves, the gun, the zip ties, the vehicle. Every fixed point of the story, Quinn had been feeding the FBI for a week, worked out in advance, like lines before a performance. On September 16th, the FBI got back the forensics on her cell phone. In the days before Labor Day weekend, she'd been reading about the J.C. Dugard abduction, a woman held captive in California for 18 years, and the biggest story in the country that summer. She had been studying how a real one looks. A warrant was signed. She was arrested and charged with threats or extortion, and her attorneys moved straight to her psychiatric history. She was sent to a facility in Georgia for evaluation. The motive never resolved into anything clean. $50,000 was not a life-changing sum to a woman living where she lived. What the plot actually bought her was 3 days with Osmanovich, and a way to come home as the woman all of Northeast Florida had been praying for. The money looks less like a goal than an excuse to vanish. 3,000 homes, 200 officers, 16 of the 27 victim recovery dogs in the entire country. For 24 days, the largest search West Yorkshire police had mounted in 30 years, swept every drain, every field, every derelict building around Dewsbury, looking for a 9-year-old girl. She was a mile away the whole time, drugged, sealed inside the base of a bed, put there by an arrangement her own mother had helped to make. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. The Moorside Estate sits on a rise above the town, a grid of pebble-dashed terraces and low-council semis built for mill workers whose mills had long since closed. In 2008, work in the area was mostly warehouse shifts, supermarket shifts, or no work at all. People knew each other's front doors, each other's arguments, each other's finances. It was the kind of place where a neighbor could tell you what time your washing machine finished its cycle. Number 24. Moorside Road was one of those houses. Karen Matthews lived there, 32 years old, short, heavy-set, a woman most of the estate had known since she was a teenager herself. She had 7 children by 5 different men. On 2 of the birth certificates, no father was recorded at all. Her partner at the time was Craig Meehan, 22, 10 years her junior, who worked the fish counter at a local supermarket. The third of those 7 children was Shannon Louise Matthews, born on the 9th of September, 1998. She was 9 years old, small for her age, thin, with mousy brown hair, and a habit of standing slightly behind whoever she was with. Her teachers at Westmore Junior School described a child who was quiet rather than shy, who worked hard without drawing attention, who liked drawing and liked animals. She had a best friend. She had a favorite jacket, a pink puffer coat she wore through the winter. She was, in the words of one member of staff, the sort of pupil who never gave anyone a moment's trouble. That was the surface. Underneath it, the family had a history with the authorities that went back years. Shannon and one of her siblings had been placed on the Child Protection Register in 2002. They were taken off it again in late 2003. When the assessment concluded, they were no longer at risk of significant harm. The register entry had cited, among other things, a mother who put her own relationships with a succession of men ahead of her children's need for something steady. A later review would summarize the household in a single phrase: neglectful parenting, broken up by stretches of care that were just about adequate. Just about adequate was enough. It kept the file open and the door closed. Social workers came and went. Nothing escalated, nothing was removed. And so by February 2008, Shannon Matthews was a 9-year-old girl walking to school half a mile from her front door, in a house that the system had already looked at twice, and twice decided to leave alone. A mile northeast of the Moorside Estate, across the valley in Batley Carr, there was a terraced flat at number 26 Lydgate Gardens. The man who rented it lived alone. He was 39. He had been born Paul Drake, and at some point he had gone to the trouble of legally changing his name to Michael Donovan, a name taken, according to those who knew him, from a character in an American science fiction series he liked. He was unemployed. He had a string of previous convictions behind him: arson, shoplifting, criminal damage. He had a history of mental health problems and a standing prescription for temazepam, a hypnotic sedative used to knock out insomnia. Neighbors in the street described a man who kept his curtains shut and rarely spoke. He drove an old car. He collected things. He was, by every account, unremarkable in the specific way that makes a person invisible. The sort of adult a child's family knows exists without ever really thinking about him, because he was family. Michael Donovan was the uncle of Craig Meehan, which made him, in the loose arithmetic of that household, the great-uncle by association of Karen Matthews' children. At some point in the weeks before February 2008, Donovan and Karen Matthews began talking about money. What the two of them worked out between them would only be reconstructed later in a courtroom from phone records and from the things the flat itself gave up. But the shape of it was this. A child would go missing, not permanently, not violently. She would simply be somewhere else for a while, long enough for the story to get into the papers, long enough for the public appeals to run, long enough for someone to put up money. Then, when the reward had grown large enough, Donovan would drive Shannon into Dewsbury and let her out near the market. He would turn the car around the corner, come back, and find her, a stranger stumbling across the missing girl the whole country was looking for. He would deliver her to a police station. He would claim the money, and he and Karen Matthews would split it. The preparation was not sophisticated, but it was deliberate. The bed in the back room was a divan, the type with a hollow base beneath the mattress, fitted with storage drawers. Donovan modified it. He made a space in that base large enough for a child, and he arranged it so it could be closed from the outside. Not a coffin, a compartment. Somewhere she could be put in a hurry if anyone knocked. He laid in supplies, food that did not need cooking, children's DVDs to keep her occupied and quiet. And there was one more item, later found in the loft, an elasticated strap secured to a roof beam, long enough to let a small girl move between rooms and short enough to stop her reaching the front door. Then there were the drugs, temazepam from his own prescription, meclizine, the active ingredient in over-the-counter travel sickness tablets, which causes drowsiness as a side effect. A subdued child does not cry out. A subdued child does not run. A subdued child sleeps through the middle of the day. Everything was ready before Shannon Matthews knew anything about it. It was an ordinary school day, and it ended with a swimming lesson. Shannon's class was taken from Westmore Junior School to the pool at Dewsbury Sports Center in the afternoon. Chlorine, wet hair, cold air on the walk back. At 3:10, she was seen outside the school gates, wearing the pink puffer jacket, carrying her swimming bag. Her home was half a mile away, 10 minutes walk, along roads she had walked hundreds of times. She never arrived. At 6:48 that evening, Karen Matthews dialed 999. She told the operator her daughter had not come home from school. The call was recorded, as all of them are. It would be played to the public 2 weeks later and picked apart line by line for years afterwards. The first patrol cars were on the estate within the hour. It was February in West Yorkshire, dark by 5:30, temperature dropping toward freezing, a thin wind coming off the moor. Officers did what officers do first. They checked the house. They checked the gardens. They knocked on the neighbors' doors and asked whether anyone had seen a small girl in a pink coat. Nobody had. By 10 o'clock, the search had a shape. Torch beams moving across the playing fields behind Moorside Road. Officers walking the ginnels between the terraces. Someone was sent to check the school. Someone else went to the sports center and pulled the CCTV, which gave them the last confirmed image of her, leaving the pool, alive and unhurried and completely unaware. The working assumption in those first hours was the one that is always made. Children of 9 do not vanish on a half-mile walk. They go to a friend's house and forget the time. They hide because they are in trouble. They fall asleep somewhere warm. By midnight, nobody on the estate believed that anymore. She was not on the estate. She was in a flat in Batley Car, and she had been there since the afternoon. What happened in that first night was described later only in fragments, some of it from the physical evidence in the flat, some of it from what Shannon herself was eventually able to tell specially trained officers in 10-minute sessions in a room made to look like a classroom. She'd been told she was going away for a bit. She'd been told to stay quiet. She was not to answer the door. She was not to go near the windows. There was a list of rules, and she was expected to keep to them. The flat had 2 floors and no way out that a 9-year-old could use. The curtains stayed closed. The television played children's films on a loop. And when Michael Donovan needed to leave, for shopping, for anything, the elasticated strap went on, tethered up to the beam, and the front door locked behind him. Somewhere in the first days, the tablets started. Not enough to make her ill, enough to flatten her out, enough to turn a bright, watchful child into someone who slept in the afternoons and did not ask questions and did not make noise that carried through a party wall. Half a mile in one direction, her school was holding a special assembly. A mile in the other, she lay in a room with the curtains shut, and the search for her had already begun. Within a week, the operation had outgrown anything West Yorkshire Police had run in a generation. 200 uniformed officers, 60 detectives. At its height, roughly a tenth of the entire force's operational strength was tied up in one inquiry, in one corner of one town. 1,500 motorists were stopped and questioned on the roads around Dewsbury. 3,000 houses were searched, not knocked on, searched, room by room, loft by loft, with the occupants standing in their own hallways watching strangers open their cupboards. 16 of the 27 specialist victim recovery dogs in the United Kingdom were brought to West Yorkshire. Divers went into the water. Forensic teams examined 40 separate scenes and eliminated them one after another. The final cost would be put at around £3.2 million. It was the largest inquiry the force had mounted since the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper 30 years earlier, and it produced nothing. The estate did not wait to be told what to do. Moorside organized itself with a speed that surprised the press when the press finally turned up. The community center became a headquarters. Women who had never run anything larger than a school raffle were suddenly coordinating shifts, printing posters, feeding volunteers, keeping a book of who had walked which streets. Ribbons went up on lampposts and gateposts and car aerials, white ones, then pink ones, then any color anybody had. Photocopied pictures of a girl in a pink coat went into every shop window in Dewsbury. Men who worked nights searched in the mornings. Teenagers walked the moor in groups. People who could not afford the petrol drove out to check laybys anyway. Then the money came. The Sun offered a reward of £20,000 for information leading to Shannon's safe return. A business in Huddersfield put up $5,000 more. And on the 10th of March, 20 days into the search, with no trace of her found and public interest starting to slide, the newspaper raised its offer. £50,000. Through all of it, the cameras kept coming back to one face. Karen Matthews stood outside that community center and made appeal after appeal. She wept on national television. She held her daughter's teddy bear. She spoke to breakfast programs and radio programs and gave interviews on the doorstep, saying she just wanted her daughter home, saying someone out there must know something. The police released the recording of her 999 call to the public, hoping it would jog a memory somewhere. And the estate closed ranks around her. Neighbors cooked for her. Friends sat with her through the nights. The women running the campaign defended her ferociously against anyone who suggested her home life was anyone's business. By the middle of March, Dewsbury Moor was an exhausted place. People were sleeping badly. Parents were walking their children the 200 yards to school and standing at the gates until the doors closed. There was a rumor every day, and none of them led anywhere. 24 days is a long time to keep hoping. Most of the people carrying those posters had already stopped. Detective Superintendent Andy Brennan was running an inquiry with no crime scene. That was the fundamental problem. There was no blood, no struggle, no abandoned bag, no witness who had seen anyone take her. There was a girl on CCTV walking out of a swimming pool, and then there was nothing at all. Every investigative route began at the same blank wall. So they worked the routes anyway. Registered sex offenders across the district were visited and accounted for. Vehicles logged in the area on the afternoon of the 19th were traced through number plates. Drainage systems were opened. Reservoirs and ponds were searched. Derelict mill buildings, and there were plenty of those around Dewsbury, were gone through floor by floor. Officers pulled bus timetables, checked taxi firms, sat through hours of grainy town center footage looking for a pink coat. On the 26th of February, a week in, the force said publicly what it had already accepted privately. They feared Shannon had fallen into the wrong hands. That statement changed the temperature of the whole thing. Up to that point, The estate had been searching for a lost child. From that morning, they were searching for a child someone had taken. There was another problem, and it was harder to say out loud. Detectives spend their working lives sitting opposite people in the worst hours of those people's lives. They develop a feel for it, not evidence. Nothing you could put before a jury, just a sense of where the weight of grief normally falls. And something about the mother did not sit right. It was not the crying. The crying was constant. It was what came in between. Her account of that Tuesday afternoon kept shifting at the edges. Who had been in the house, when she had started to worry, who she had called first and in what order. Small things. The kind of inconsistency that ordinary distress produces all the time, which is exactly what makes it useless as proof. Officers noticed the questions she did not ask. Family members of missing children tend to ask the same ones on a loop. What are you doing now? Have you checked this? Why has nobody looked there? They chase the detectives. They demand. That pressure was largely absent. And there were people on the estate who had noticed it too. Not many, and not loudly, because saying it out loud in that community in March 2008 would have got you shouted off the street. But the whisper existed. Meanwhile, the family circle around her was being pulled apart by its own weight. Craig Meehan was questioned. Relatives were questioned. Computers were seized from the house on Moorside Road as a matter of routine. And what was found on Meehan's machine had nothing whatsoever to do with Shannon's disappearance. But it ended with him arrested on the 2nd of April and convicted later that year on 11 counts of possessing indecent images. It was a separate crime, and it poisoned the public atmosphere around the case for good. None of it moved the inquiry forward. What finally did was clerical. Somewhere in the incident room, detectives were working through the thing every major inquiry builds, a list. Every relative, every associate, every address connected to the family, however distantly, to be visited and ticked off and eliminated. On that list, several pages down, was the name of a man in Batley Carr who had changed his name from Paul Drake, uncle of the mother's partner. No obvious relevance, a mile away. Officers had already been to Lydgate Gardens once, early on a routine sweep, and had seen nothing worth writing up. The call came from Lydgate Gardens itself. A woman living on the same short street, who had been thinking for days about the man at number 26. The curtains that never opened, the sounds that did not fit a household of one. Just after 1 o'clock, officers went through his front door. Inside, the flat was stale and dim, every curtain drawn, a television still running. The place had the closed, warm smell of rooms that have not been aired in weeks. In the back bedroom stood a divan. They pulled the base apart. She was in the drawer space, small, pale, silent. A 9-year-old folded into a compartment under a mattress. Michael Donovan was jammed into the other half of the same base, and he was dragged out of it in handcuffs. Neighbors had come to their doors by then. They watched him taken to a car. Then an officer came out of the house carrying a child, holding her against his shoulder the way you carry someone who cannot walk far. Somebody called out to ask if it was her. He said yes. He said she was safe. Shannon Matthews had been missing for 24 days. She had been 800 yards further from her school than her own bedroom was. She was placed under police protection that afternoon. The evidence came out of her body. Urine and hair samples were taken within days. Toxicologists found temazepam, Donovan's own prescription drug, and meclizine, the sedating ingredient in travel sickness tablets. Then, the hair analysis went further back than anyone expected. It indicated she had been receiving temazepam for as long as 20 months, which is to say, long before she ever set foot in that flat. In the loft, officers recovered the elasticated strap still fixed to the roof beam. Karen Matthews was arrested on the 6th of April and charged 2 days later. In September, kidnap and false imprisonment were added. The trial opened at Leeds Crown Court on the 11th of November, 2008. Donovan told the jury he had been frightened of her, that he had been threatened, that he had gone along with something he could not get out of. Matthews sobbed through her own evidence and denied everything, saying she had been told to take the blame. Prosecuting counsel put it plainly. She had given police 5 different accounts and told lie after lie after lie. On the 4th of December, both were convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. On the 23rd of January 2009, Mr. Justice McComb called what they had done despicable and gave them 8 years each. Shannon was interviewed for 7 hours across 5 days in 10-minute sessions in a room built to look like a classroom. She was never called as a witness. The court was told she was disturbed and traumatized and had nightmares. She was given a new identity and a new family. She's an adult now, somewhere, under a name nobody publishes. Karen Matthews served 4 years and walked out in April 2012. Donovan was already out. He died of cancer in 2024, aged 54, still living under a name he had changed again. 3.2 million pounds of public money. 24 days of a child's life spent under a mattress for a reward that was never paid. Please like this video and share your thoughts about this case in the comments. Be sure to check out our previous videos as well. See you soon.